I love The Last of Us. That's no mystery. In fact, I love The Last of Us so much, I'm gonna give you a little extra skin because you deserve it. It's actually just really freaking hot in this room and I haven't even started recording the video. You know what? The shoes are coming off. This is the behind the scenes stuff you don't see in YouTube videos. Yeah, shoes coming off. I might not be wearing pants right now for all you know. Point is, if you've been subscribed to my channel for any length of time, then you'll be aware that I've done all sorts of analyses, breakdowns, and commentaries on the original game. I even did a full breakdown of the game that is over 2 hours long. It's literally the length of a feature-length film. Probably could have been a lot shorter, but you know, I like talking. All of this to say, I am a huge fan of the franchise, and judging by the view counts on all of the videos I've done on it, it seems like a lot of you are fans as well. And so, with the latest announcements from Naughty Dog with regards to The Last of Us Part 2, I feel compelled to offer my thoughts on it as well, because I'm an egomaniacal YouTuber who thinks that all of his ideas and thoughts should be published to the masses. But I guess this is as good a time as any to welcome you to a new series I will be doing called NitGrit, where we dive into all of the nitty-gritty and intricacies of any topic that seems of particular interest. We'll explore the origins, the reasons why, and anything else that gives us a clearer understanding of what's going on with a given topic. And what better pilot episode discussion topic than The Last of Us Part 2. Now, I've spent a while collecting all of my thoughts since we saw the latest trailers from Naughty Dog. I hate knee-jerk response videos that are inevitably requiring of corrections and retractions, so I've taken some time to process what we saw and listen to all of the interviews that the game's director, Neil Druckmann, has given to the press. All of this to say that after this process, I am confident that The Last of Us Part 2 will be wildly successful, and admittedly, this is a very vague and ubiquitous statement, so I'm going to try and explain what I mean in the next few minutes. But be warned, we're going to be breaking down some of the grittier parts of the new footage, and we're going to be discussing several interview topics and things that Neil Druckmann has said recently. So if you're looking to completely avoid spoilers and footage of any kind of The Last of Us Part 2, this would be a good time to click away. Consider this to be your spoiler warning. Now, with all of that stuff out of the way, let's get into it. To understand the shoes into which The Last of Us Part 2 is stepping, we need to go back to the very beginning of 2009. Naughty Dog was just coming off of the release of Uncharted 2: Among Thieves, a game which is weirdly not discussed very often considering how good it is. Like, for real, it has a 96 on Metacritic. That's insane. The newest God of War game has a 94. That's the level that we're talking about when we are addressing Uncharted 2. But regardless, the game sold like crazy, and Naughty Dog's management decided that it was time that they split into two development teams. And this would allow them to release games more frequently, and it would allow them to explore multiple IPs or intellectual properties at the same time. However, once this happened, they were still faced with the problem of trying to determine what they should work on. They knew that one team would be assigned to Uncharted 3. That was a given. I mean, seriously, to avoid releasing a sequel to a highly successful game would be just insane. It wouldn't make any sense. Who would do that? Anyway, they looked at many options, such as returning to the Jak and Daxter series, spinning off into a sci-fi franchise, and many others that they don't actually want to talk about publicly, likely because they're going to return to them after The Last of Us Part 2 launches, since Uncharted, at least for the moment, seems to be on ice. Point is, they talked about a lot of options, and according to reports and leaks, it seems that about half a dozen of these suggestions and pitches made it to the desks of executives, who then sifted through them, tried to figure out what the best option would be, eventually settling on The Last of Us. And this decision was only made after many different things were considered. The prospective game setting, gameplay, characters, and their diversity, but perhaps most importantly, they were evaluating tone, a consideration made all the more important by Naughty Dog's prior titles. Now, before The Last of Us, Naughty Dog titles tended to stay away from really serious subject matter. Whether we look at Jak and Daxter, which was obviously very cartoony in its presentation and subject matter, or even Uncharted 1 and 2, both of which were fairly kitschy action movie style games. None of them really delved into the intricacies of character arcs and pretty much everything that made The Last of Us great. I know, it sounds ridiculous looking back at it now. It's like such a match made in heaven, and they do it so well. It seems like they always should have been doing it. Like EA and loot boxes, Meatloaf and motorcycles, or Tim Curry and space. Space! But as with all of these things, Naughty Dog's proclivity towards the macabre and gritty wasn't always so obvious. I mean, they started with Crash Bandicoot in 1996, a game that, while obviously quite sexual, avoids discussions of much depth and gravitas. In 2001, they released Jak and Daxter, the precursor legacy, which also kept it all fun and light, and in 2007, when they came out with the original Uncharted Drake's Fortune, it just continued on with the general feeling of light-hearted fun, even though the new Uncharted series was a little grittier. Despite all of this, it was the step towards slightly mature subject matter and audience appeals that was really important. And after just a few years working on Uncharted and Nathan Drake, they knew that they were ready to take on something a bit more challenging. Furthermore, the team was apparently begging for more mature and edgy subject matter within the work that they were doing. This is something that you see when you listen to any of the interviews that Neil Druckmann or any of the other developers over at Naughty Dog have given in the last few years, that artists at their studios were begging for something meaty to sink their teeth into. It's all fun and games to make lighthearted games like Jak and Daxter or Crash Bandicoot, but eventually, as you grow up as a developer, you start to look for something a little more intense, which makes sense. I mean, think of it. If you're working on one thing day in, day out for years and years and years, in that time, you could have met someone special, gotten married, adopted a stray bearded dragon for all we know, and maybe even had some kids. That's a lot of maturing that's happened in just the span of a few years. And heck, I mean, this is exactly what happened to Neil Druckmann, the man behind The Last of Us itself. When they started working on the game, he was thinking about having kids, and by the end of the project, he was a father with a kid who was like 1 or 2 years old. The point is, artists are people, and they go through changes in their lives just the same as you and I. And because their art tends to reflect their lives, you should only expect that their art become more mature with time. And this is part of the reason that in 2009, when all of those potential game proposals were on the desks of executives over at Naughty Dog, the head honchos decided to go with The Last of Us pitch, because they were interested in something darker, new, fresh, and challenging. It was the natural progression of the studio, and so they began working on The Last of Us by December of 2009, and the stage was set for something truly new and different, not just for Naughty Dog, but for the gaming industry as a whole. As development commenced on the game, it was clear to everyone involved that the end product would be nothing like any of their previous games. In fact, there was actually a lot of anxiety surrounding this. Neil Druckmann, for instance, said in the documentary about the creation of the game that he and many of the other developers were worried right up until the day that review embargoes lifted that The Last of Us might destroy their studio's reputation entirely. Literally, they said that they were certain that this was going to be the game that destroyed Naughty Dog's legacy. Again, it seems silly now looking back, but at the time, it surely felt like an excessive gamble. It was a zombie, third-person, post-apocalyptic game. Needless to say, it was stepping into an incredibly saturated genre. There were a ton of technical issues, and the experimental narrative design worried the developers because they were unsure if they would actually be able to properly build the relationship between Joel, Ellie, and the player. And I think this is something that we often forget, those of us who are not actively pursuing and engaged in artistic pursuits as we are watching videos like these and we're criticizing different artists and creators for how they lose perspective on their projects. This is the thing you have to remember. They're working on games like The Last of Us for years and years on end, 3, 4, 5 years at a time. You better believe that they're gonna have trouble losing perspective and then refocusing and regaining that perspective as they go through. If you work on anything for even a week, you start to lose perspective and you're like, is this good or is this garbage? I have no idea. It looks the same to me. I can't tell. Imagine working on a game for years and then take it up a notch, raise the stakes as high as they possibly can go to the point where your entire studio's reputation depends on the reception of this game. And then you decide to do something seemingly incredibly risky, seemingly excessively ballsy in its inception. It can only be more stressful. However, the game launched in 2013 to critical acclaim and was immediately called one of the best games ever made, nominated for countless Game of the Year awards, and it was clear that The Last of Us had just set a new standard in narrative storytelling within interactive media. After the game, it was clear that Naughty Dog had just struck gold. As a result, management ordered a sequel to the game and asked that the studio release it around 2020, which would put the game at the very end of the console generation, mirroring the 2013 release of the original game. They released 2 games in the interim, namely Uncharted 4 in 2016 and The Lost Legacy in 2017. Some say that Lost Legacy was just a big DLC for Uncharted 4, but it was actually sold as an independent product, so I'm counting it as such. Not that it really matters. I mean, a lot of people watching this video might not even know that The Lost Legacy even existed. That's my point. You know what? We just got so personal, so honest. I think it's time we loosen up a little. We're deep in the video at this point. Why not? Let's light a candle. Ooh, this juicy black cherries. Getting saucy in here. Yeah, this is a new candle. I whipped it out just for you. Regardless, they developed a lot of new tech for these games, and a lot of it was developed in anticipation for the next Last of Us entry. Things such as new dynamic mapping for water, dirt, mud, and dust, improved facial animations for characters, and seamless cutscene to gameplay transitions. And can we just appreciate those transitions for a second? Like, nothing is quite as fun as watching an intense and moving emotional cutscene and then realizing all of a sudden that you're in control of the character.
So where you want to start?
How about that building right over there?
Oh, you mean the one with the massive guard tower?
Yeah, I say we go see what it was guarding.
Works for me. This is... I mean, I'm speechless. Holy goddamn shit, Nathan!
That's your idea of speechless?
God, how long do you think it took them to build this place?
Years. Decades, even. How the hell did they keep it a secret all that time?
It's just this place. I mean, even without the treasure, this is quite the find.
Oh, is that me? Who would have guessed? I love nuts in my mouth so much I didn't even realize. Anyways, with that having been said, Naughty Dog was prepped and primed for the most ambitious game that they had ever made. I know that was like a funny bit or whatever, or at least I hope I got like a heavy exhale from you or something, but like I'm not used to having that many nuts in my mouth at a given time. Felt right. I'm kidding. I have a girlfriend. Jeez. Now, we didn't hear anything about this sequel until it was unveiled with one of the most memorable trailers, I think, that has ever been released to the public. The camera cuts through some shots of exteriors, eventually landing on a shot of a road sign with the Firefly's insignia painted on. Then we see Ellie sitting on a bed, shaking. She composes herself and starts playing the guitar, a callback to the time in the first game when Joel told Ellie that he'd like to teach her how to play the guitar when they finish with their trip.
Yeah, once we're done with this whole thing, I'm gonna teach you how to play guitar. I reckon you'd really like that. What do you say, huh?
She then sings a cover of Sean James's song Through the Valley. Her rendition is so raw and honest that it's truly heartbreaking when you really process the lyrics and apply them to her situation. Furthermore, she seems utterly alone, abandoned, scared. And this may not seem significant, but it directly mirrors the emotion and feeling that Ellie experienced in the first game. She doesn't feel like she can do anything, even though she's perfectly capable. She just needs somebody to push her and show her that she is capable and able to overcome any obstacle, which is when Joel enters the room and asks her,
"What are you doing, kiddo? You really gonna go through with this?"
And then the trailer ends with her looking at the camera and saying,
"I'm gonna find, and I'm gonna kill every last one of them."
Now, I don't know about you, but when this dropped, I myself. People have been waiting so long for any news on a sequel to The Last of Us. We all knew it was coming, but to actually get verification and to have it done in such a beautiful and fantastically delicate way, it was the perfect way they could have announced it. Now, from the outset, for any of these game announcements, the first thing that people are wondering about is what the game is going to be. I know that that sounds like an excessively vague question at the end of the day, but it is the titular question. For a sequel, the developers are trying to satiate two groups of people fundamentally. Granted, they are weighted differently. These two groups are those who played and hopefully enjoyed the first game, and the second group are people who are going to be exposed to the franchise for the first time. Usually the former will be the preferred group, being given priority to make sure we satiate the fans first and then appeal to new viewers and gamers from the outside. Sure, you should care about the newbies. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but at the end of the day, you should be prioritizing those who were with you from the very beginning, at least in my mind. And so, for a video game sequel, the assumption is that it will lean into the things that fans enjoyed about the first game, and it will shed those things for which fans did not care. And I know all of this seems very self-explanatory, but you'd be amazed how many studios don't do this. Or I guess you could say they tried to, but they fundamentally misunderstand what their fans enjoyed about the first game and what they didn't. A good example being Dark Souls 2. I still think that it's a very, very good game at the end of the day. I still enjoy playing it, but it is very different from the original Dark Souls, and it leans into what many people consider to be weaknesses and leans away from what many people consider to be strengths, such as complex level design, interweaving levels, and all those types of things people really enjoyed, focusing on single character on NPC fights instead of on group fights and dynamics. Again, these are fine design choices to be made, and you can still have a good game at the end of the day, but it might lead to the first group, the fans, being less satisfied than the newbies. Anyway, the point of all of this is just to say that it is crucial to understand what your community wants, what your fans want, and what you did well the first time around. If you don't understand any or all of those three things, you're setting yourself up for failure. But on the contrary, if you do understand these three things, then you're setting yourself up for a massive success. And say what you will about Naughty Dog, but time and time again, they've proven themselves to be masters of these three. Proof positive, the overwhelmingly positive reception of every single sequential release in the Uncharted series. Every time a new game is launched in that franchise, it is received just as well, if not better, than the last game. And I know we can argue over Uncharted 2 being better than 3, being better than 4. We can have those discussions. Absolutely, I'm not saying that we shouldn't. But at the end of the day, these games are at the very least held in similar regards, constantly being nominated for Game of the Year every time that they launch. It's just, I think it's undeniable. Doubtless, one of Naughty Dog's many talents is that they are able to consistently improve on previous entries and mechanics, constantly pushing the limits of what is possible, both in terms of the narrative and in terms of the technical possibilities. And of course, this is made all the more obvious by everything that we've seen with regards to The Last of Us Part 2. Now, the game doesn't release until next year. However, already we've learned of several ways that Naughty Dog is poised to refine their already fantastically well-reviewed content. But this doesn't mean that they're going to reinvent the wheel. And what I mean by this is that there are usually two ways by which one party can fundamentally change something. One, they can completely redesign it, or two, they can refine the previously established design. What this looks like in practical terms would be something like the iPhone. Apple will redesign the product in some major way with the iPhone X, for instance, and then they will spend 2 years refining that design, and then the cycle will repeat itself. This will usually be done to allow for major leaps to be made in the hardware department, while software iterations are made which are much more flexible. And really, this process doesn't look any different in the gaming space. It's just different timetables. If anything, video games in many ways are more constrained than something like cell phones. For instance, in the tech industry with iPhones and with Samsung Galaxy Notes and all of these different types of phones, you're dealing with major hardware redesigns that usually take 2 to 3 years to actually happen in practice. And then in that interim time, you're focused on software updates, small camera improvements, things like that. But in the gaming space, you're dealing with consoles that only refresh every 6-7 years. And I know what you're thinking, maybe Pro consoles count as a refresh, but if anything, that's like the S edition of an iPhone or the Plus edition of an Android phone. It's just a slightly upgraded hardware mechanism, but it's not fundamentally changing what's possible, because at the end of the day, you have to develop for the lowest common denominator. If you want your game to release across all the platforms, you have to develop for the lowest common denominator at the bottom of that totem pole. Therefore, developers are left optimizing and refining, while the big guys at Sony and Microsoft are working very hard, I'm sure, on getting the next generation of consoles ready. What this means for Naughty Dog and The Last of Us Part 2 is that this will be a game of refinement and not of reinvention. And the developers have said as much. Fundamentally, their goal with this game is to tell a story, the next and possibly final part of the story. Although I will say that they've been iffy on whether or not this is going to be the final chapter in The Last of Us story. They've said before, The Last of Us at its heart is a story about Joel and Ellie. And I get why they don't want to say if this is definitive, because I think a lot of people would read into that one of those two characters are going to die at the end of the game. So I get it. We don't know. Might be the end of the franchise, or they might set it up for another 5 games. Who knows? But this game is aiming to take the player on a journey all about quote-unquote hate, according to Neil Druckmann, the game's writer and director. This is, of course, in contrast to the original game, which he says was all about love, forgiveness, and moving on. Why is this significant? Well, because it's a shift in tone, feeling, or flavor. It's not a change in the fundamentals themselves of gameplay or anything else. This shift, however, is also one towards a darker, grittier type of story, something that Naughty Dog has been moving towards for years, really since Uncharted 3. The original Last of Us was dark, sure, lots of death and depression all over the place. However, if you watch any of the newest trailers for Part 2, you'll see that the game takes this to a whole new level. People are being lynched on screen, having their bones crushed with a hammer, taking said hammer to the face, getting disemboweled, getting blown up. Across the board, it is gory, mature, and more dark than ever. They're showing us things that they used to just imply, and this isn't because their tech has evolved to the point where it's easier to do. After all, you can show and do all of these things that I just stated with lower quality tech. I mean, heck, games have been doing gory explosions for years, but this is one of the first times a concerted effort has been made to make it look completely real in the context of the game's world and story. Furthermore, in the latest trailers, we see new details added, such as nudity, names given to every NPC to allow for enemies to communicate with each other on a personalized basis, and a more fleshed out city of people, much more dense than anything we saw in the original game. All of this goes to show us that The Last of Us Part 2 is aiming to be more grounded, more real, and more mature than anything we've seen before. Now, I've said from the beginning of this channel that I believe that video games are the natural progression and evolution of narrative storytelling. I think its interactive elements help us to tell stories in ways that no other medium allows for, whether you're talking about TVs, movies, songs, plays, musicals, paintings, poems, novels, whatever it is, you name it. I think video games are capable, doesn't mean they always do, but are capable of doing it better. Video games are a fantastic narrative tool, and one of the reasons that I and so many other people love Naughty Dog so much is because they are fantastic practitioners of the art form that is video game narrative storytelling using this tool. And this is just one of the reasons that I am so unbelievably excited about The Last of Us Part 2, given everything that we've seen thus far. It's all building and leading to what I think could very well be one of the greatest narrative experiences, forget just video games, but narrative experiences ever crafted. And I honestly don't think that that's much of an overstatement, given Naughty Dog's track record and what is capable on modern hardware. But at the end of the day, we still don't know precisely what this game will bring us. Sure, we can have a good idea by watching trailers and interviews. We can get a good feeling for what they're aiming to bring us and to bring to the table, but we won't know until launch day, until February 21st of 2020. That's when we're gonna sit down, start to play through, and we're gonna see what they actually have. But what I can say confidently is that I am pumped for The Last of Us Part 2. And to be honest, I think it's setting itself up to be one of the most prolific games to ever be released in gaming history. I mean, it's apparently already outsold all of Sony's previous records for pre-orders. Like, this thing is going to be huge. No matter how it turns out, I'm sure that we're all waiting with bated breath to see what it actually brings to the table. And we're all shivering with anticipation. But that's all for me. Thank you for watching, honestly and truly. Make sure to check out my podcast on iTunes and Spotify, Talk Gaming. I'll have links to all of that down in the description box below. Also, if you want a signed Khaleesi sticker like the one I have on my water bottle right here, it's only $5. I'll ship it worldwide for free. Sign it. I'll write you a little personalized note. Super fun, easy. You support me, support the channel, support Khaleesi and her addiction to blue hornworms. It's a win for everybody. Make sure to go over to lukestevens.net, get them before they're gone, because I only have a set number. Also, I'm going to start giving away merch, game codes, and collectibles every single week in the flagship video of that week. If you want to sign up to enter, just go over to lukestevens.net, sign up for the mailing list. Super easy, it's free, why not? It's a win-win for everybody. I get to give back to you, you get to be notified of some cool stuff that I'm doing, get behind the scenes looks. This week's winner is Sebastian Nolt. So that's the username you have. Check your email, my friend. I'll be getting in touch with you very, very shortly, and I'm gonna send you your thing or things. Again, links to everything in the description. I love you. Shout out to everybody who was repping the merch this week, who got their Khaleesi stickers and sent me pictures of them. You guys rock. Again, thank you. You're doing the Lord Khaleesi's work. You're making the channel happen. I cannot thank you enough. Let me know your thoughts on all this in the comment section below. I love you all. I'm bad at outros. I don't know how to wrap these up. I love you. Bye. Bye. End of video. End it. Cut it. Cut it.